Welcome, everyone, to this session on the test data concerns in ICD10 test planning. My name is Randy Rice. I'm going to be joined by some folks working with me on this, and so we'll introduce them in just a minute. And actually, thank you guys all for that have joined us on the new site here, or I should say the alternate site. We were having some technical difficulties with the other one. It was completely down for some reason. So anyway, we're all here, and so the slides are going to be posted on my blog at randallrice.blogspot.com. I have them uploaded right now, but I don't have the link out there just quite yet. It'll be there in about probably 5 or 10 minutes after the session. Okay, so I'll also mention that again during the session, but I'm easy to find out there, randallrice.blogspot.com. Okay, so in starting this meeting today also, we're not running it in webinar mode, which means that if you're connected in through an audio connection, through your phone or whatever, and if you can hear me, I can very likely hear you if you have a question. So in that regard, I'm going to ask that you keep your phones on mute on the other side, or your computer, whatever the case may be there. And but if you do have a question, you're more than welcome to answer it, or to ask it, and we'll try to answer it. There's also the chat window that you'll see. If you click on you'll see the bar at the top of your meeting interface. It's the second one to the right, or a second one from the right. You'll see the little telephone audio symbol. Move one to the left from that, you'll see the little call out. If you click that, it will pop up a meeting chat window that you can come in and ask your question if you don't want to ask it in front of everyone. Okay, so that will be a way that you can ask questions, and we do encourage that. We don't have a ton of slides today because we want to focus on a few core ideas here about test data in the context of ICD10. And we also want to give you a chance to ask any questions that you might have. Okay, so at the outset, my name is Randy Rice, Rice Consulting Services in Oklahoma City. I've got over 35 years of software testing and development experience, about 24 on testing specifically. I'm a fully certified advanced level tester, which means I hold all 3 of the ISTQB advanced certifications. One of the characteristics of my client base has been a lot of healthcare organizations, a lot of health insurance companies also. And so I take a very process-driven view toward testing. I've written a couple of books, Surviving the Top 10 Challenges of Software Testing and Testing Dirty Systems. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Tauheed Ahmed. Tauheed, if you can give us a little bit of your background, please.
Sure. Thank you, Randy. Well, my name is Tauheed, and I've been in the testing field for the last, I would say, 7 to 10 years. I did my master's in software engineering, and then I continued on my PhD, and my research was in software testing. While I was doing my PhD, I worked for different companies. I worked for Progressive Insurance, Sabre Holdings, Yahoo, and I was a test engineer, their software test engineer. Created, established automation in different companies, created a testing framework for many of them, basically help and champion how to do testing in a organized manner and not really take the ad hoc approach. And then I've been working with Randy for about a year now, and that's me.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Tauheed. Yeah, she did her dissertation on cloud computing, which we also get into as well as in our practice here. Now, Dexter apparently may be having a little bit of difficulty in joining us. I will introduce him, though,
I'm on the phone, Randy.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, man. I didn't see you to accept your
Yeah.
invitation. Well, thank you, man.
Yeah. Can you do that real quick?
I don't. Okay, hang on a second. Let's see.
While Randy's doing that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Dexter Oliver. I'm with company Integrity Solutions. I'm the managing partner there, certified ICD10 consultant. Like Randy, I have over 20 years of enterprise experience, from enterprise architecture, testing, development. Specifically, over the last 5 years, we've been working with EHR implementations and doing data analytics and reporting, as well as some work with HL7. We do some DRG analytics and other things of that nature. Project management background, yellow belt as well. So combined with that, the three of us have kind of formed this collaborative group to hopefully bring to the industry a wealth of knowledge from a variety of backgrounds. I've spent, prior to entering into the healthcare industry, about 12 of my years in the financial services space. So some of the things that we're going to share today, we hope to glean from the insight that we've gotten from other industries, and hope that we can share some knowledge that will be beneficial. So, Randy?
Thank you, Dexter. Dexter, I set auto accept on just now, so are you able to see the slides yet?
I can see I know what mine are, so I can go ahead and then I'll
okay, very good. I was going to suggest you may want to click back through again to try to join. That might be the best thing. But if you have your slides, then I'll just tell you the ones that were on. So if you would please, the next slide is the importance of good test data and kind of some of the lessons learned during some past healthcare initiatives. Would you like to just go ahead and speak to that one then?
Yeah, I can do that, Randy.
Okay.
So one of the things that we wanted to share today a little bit when we talk about the importance, obvious across multiple industries, that test data is a key component when you think about your testing strategy. And so one of the things that we have noted that we want to share with you guys is that it was evident in the HIPAA 5010 conversion that happened last year in January that there were some things that were not probably thought about as it related to test data. And so we want to share some of those, and hopefully from those lessons learned, we can begin to think about, as you're in your planning phases and you begin to complete some of your assessments, what is that work that we need to do from a test data perspective. And so one of the things that actually happened, if you're not aware, and probably some of you guys may have experienced this, was that there were a lot of issues. And when we talk about issues, we're talking about the industry as a whole. Those issues span from payers, providers, as well as clearinghouses. And some of the issues started off with data quality. There were issues around field validations, obviously going from the 4010 to the 5010 HIPAA standard. There were fields that data was expected to be in that was not. There were fields that data was in and as a result of those, the validations not being correct, there were a significant amount of denied claims. And one of the things that we believe, and that from talking to various people from both the provider as well as the payer perspective, is that there will probably be a lot of denied claims, not because that they've been miscoded, but there are a lot of business rules that have to be changed. When you think about what the industry is doing, you have the Accountable Care Act in effect, and so all of the policies on the payer side, and that's a normal undertaking that happens a lot, but not at the same time when you're doing a major change in classification of the total system. So we expect that there will be a significant amount of data that will be related to denied claims, not because it was done wrong, but just because maybe the business rules were not tested as thoroughly. The other thing that was noted was there were significant communication challenges. So you've got payers who are potentially getting bombarded with calls from providers who are trying to actually find out the status of claims, and it would take days to even get a response on the claim status. And so, of course, that ultimately has an impact on the revenue cycle for everybody involved. And then lastly, there were differences that were noted in the testing environment. This is something that we want to talk about. If you guys begin to think about your testing strategies, you do need to take in consideration how close your test environments align to what the production environments look like. What was found in this first in 5010 was that things tested well in the test environment, and as soon as they moved it to production, because the environments were not similar, they immediately had issues going from the clearinghouse to the payer. So those are some of the things that you want to make note of and think about as you begin in your strategies to make sure that you take in consideration.
Okay, thanks, Dexter. And just to chime in on a couple of things that we've been working quite a bit. Dexter and I and Tauheed have on establishing solutions for things like test data and processes and all that. And one of the things that is almost like a consistent theme is that there's been a lot of people are putting a lot of trust in the idea that there's a data standard, okay, and there's a transaction standard, and that the vendors are implementing and testing the changes. And there's a fallacy in that just because you have a transaction standard for one thing doesn't mean that everyone's going to apply it correctly. But then also you have the thing that you typically see in testing where, to Dexter's point here about communication challenges, people tend to be most concerned with their own priorities, right? Their own agendas. And when you're trying to get some feedback from, let's say, a trading partner or even maybe from your own organization, you may find that it takes a lot longer than you think it will. I know that I run across that many, many times in integration testing. And just because there are standards are a good thing, but they don't ensure the correctness of the data necessarily and how it's being applied. I'm going to go on to the next slide about test data requirements, and Dexter, going to speak to this one as well because thank you.
One of the things we all would agree based on our experiences in the past around test data, as we talked about, that it's very important. One of the first things you want to start to define in your organizations are what are our test data requirements, and how do you quantify which specific ICD10 data that we need. One of the things that we would suggest is that you capture your end-to-end business processes. And so what we mean by that is, for example, if you're a hospital, you want to trace, if it was an inpatient claim, you want to trace from inpatient to physician referral all the way down to physician order, admission department, nursing, any of the auxiliary services that are provided all the way through the charge description, and then to obviously the Canon Medical Records Organization to understand all of this, to understand all of the requirements that you need to be thinking about. When we think about ICD10 and the testing effort is going to be broken down into two major efforts. One is internal testing, which is your validation, your readiness internally, and then there's going to be the end-to-end testing, which is the ability to send transactions through the community of clearinghouse to payer and return back to you with an expected result. The other thing that we think is going to be key is when you look at the scope of testing, a lot of times people spend a lot of time trying to get the right test data, and that doesn't change the window of opportunity. We still have a hard and fast date of October 1st, 2014. So one of the things that we think will be critical in helping you determine where to focus your efforts is, if you're a hospital, you want to make sure you understand potentially what the DRG shifts are going to be. Analyze your historical claim data to be able to look at potential DRG shifts. While there may be slight variances or small percentages, those variances could potentially impact your revenue. And if you're a provider, then obviously if you've done some analytics on your existing data, and if you're a payer and you've got providers who you know are submitting those potential claims that are going to have some DRG shifts, you're going to prioritize your efforts around working with them to kind of mitigate that risk. So those are going to be some things that you can do from a test data requirements perspective that you should be thinking about. Tauheed, do you want to share with them about understanding your ICD10 data?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you fine.
Okay, great. I just didn't know if I'm still logged in.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's talk about data, right? So what is data? For example, it's basically a raw form of anything. I mean, if you walk around and you just say, well, sky, path, process, it doesn't make any sense at all. So it's the information we need. But the problem right now is with big data, and it's actually a big problem, and lots of research are going on. What it is we're basically showered with so much data around us that we're having a hard time actually processing it or making good, converting that to information. So for ICD10, you're going to get data from a lot of places. I mean, patients, hospital, insurance, you talk about, you can name anything and you'll get all this data. The problem is that you cannot use all of them. So if we use all the data that we can think of and we converted that to test data and try to test from that, we would never finish testing. So before we even think about, what are our test data and how are we going to get that, we need to understand what are the data that's actually important to us, how to optimize it, how to make them effective for our testing purposes. And then once we have that, so we go from raw data to test data. And then from the test data, we actually figure out, well, we need our input and our output both for testing. So then you actually start categorizing, your test data to, well, these are my input and these are my output. These are the input that we're going to enter to test something. These are our output that we're going to match to see if our test results are correct or not. The data and the test data also drives how you're going to test something, what technique you're going to use, whether you're going to use, like equivalent partitioning, black box testing, do a boundary analysis. If you're going to use these kind of testing technique, you need, because, for example, if you don't have the internal data of a system, if you don't have a lot of data, you're going to have to use your own experience, which is called exploratory testing, to test to test anything. So the best way to approach this is actually you need a framework to basically give you a guidance, let you go through a process or a path to figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to use your test data.
And Tauheed, if I may, I would add just one thing with that is, as Tauheed said, that you have a lot of this data. One of the things you want to do is you want to, if you can, focus on those areas that are going to help you determine which clinical scenarios that you need to focus on, both internally and externally from the end-to-end perspective. And so that's going to be key as in your planning sessions when you begin to look at the structure and all of the data that you have available. Again, it's more the goal is to maximize your coverage from a testing perspective so you minimize the risk.
Yeah, that's right, Dexter, and thanks, Tauheed, for that. One of the big things we're always looking at here is, how do we maximize the coverage with the minimal amount of data? That optimization is really important, and it gives you a lot of leverage because when you think about resourcing all of this, it's not just the creation of the test data, but it's the maintaining it, it's the performing of it, it's the interrogation of it after a test is done. There's quite a bit of secondary weight that you have with your test data. And when I say weight, I mean WEIGHT. It's just this burden that you have to deal with. So it makes sense to kind of keep it lean and mean. Now, I want to kind of go back for just a step here and on this slide. We did a webinar probably about a month ago, and we lay out that we have a very process-driven approach to testing, because what we're trying to do here, and this kind of helps, I think, position this in the context of what we're talking about, is we're not trying to test the application as if it was the first time we'd ever tested it. Okay, so like if you have a vendor-provided a system, we're not proposing that you go in and you test all the input fields or everything. What we are suggesting is that you go where the best value is, and that is to make sure that your processes, your critical processes, the one that contribute to cash flow, and the one that contribute to patient safety and efficient processing of their claims actually do work. So it takes on very much a business process perspective, and it feels a lot like validation because that's truly what it is. So I just want to address a couple of perspectives here. The provider is the first one, and we're going to look at the payer as the second one. So a typical process would be that maybe as a provider, you might create a claim for a patient, you submit it, you learn, I need to modify it because it got rejected for some reason. Maybe I resubmit. I'm maybe kind of in a loop there. We receive payment from the insurance company or from Medicare or someplace, and then we have to apply that to our own patient records to show that that bill has been paid. Well, if you look at each action, every point of intersection here, you'll see that each of these are strongly dependent on test data. Now, back many years ago, actually this goes back to at least the mid-'80s that I can peg it, because Boris Weiser wrote about this in one of his books about data-driven testing. And if you've done any work with test automation, you're probably also familiar with data-driven testing, where you want to create a very reusable set of processes here or procedures, and then let the data determine the conditions that you're going to actually achieve in doing those tests. So I may have one or maybe a few create claim scenarios. Maybe there's different types of scenarios for different types of things that we're trying to test, but you let the test data then provide the information behind that claim. In this case, it would be the ICD10 code, it would be the amount of the claim and the person and so forth. And this data follows this chain along as you go throughout the life cycle of that particular thing that you're testing. Now, if we take it to the payer perspective, okay, so let's say you're in the role of an insurance company here, then you're going to be doing something very similar, but your processes are going to be different. And your data will probably be different as well. Instead of having patient data, for example, you're going to have member data. Or you may have insurance data, you may have clearinghouse data that you have to deal with. So now we're doing a very similar process, though. We're receiving a claim, we're processing a claim, adjudicating it, processing a payment. There could be a very high number of processes here, but the thing that drives them all will be this set of reusable and restorable test data, okay? So the processes are reusable. The test data is also reusable, but it's also controllable, okay? And that's a key point here, because if you're in the middle of a test, let's say, and all of a sudden, in this context, of the payer context, you see a new member appear, you're going to say, how did that happen? Or maybe the member's a claim experience differs from the last test that you performed. This data has to be locked down to some point, and it has to be controlled. That's kind of the control part from a trust perspective, but you also have the control from a process perspective, so that you know exactly which data was used in which test. And that also requires a framework to make that happen. Now, the good news is that that's the kind of framework that we're working on here. So, that's not the first time anyone's ever done this. So, Dexter, I'm going to pass this back to you if you can kind of give us some of the ways that we can see data established.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things when we talk about, so now we understand the importance of data. We need to group it in an organized fashion, as Randy has alluded to, for us to be able to organize it. And we've kind of broken down the data that we believe is going to be a part of this transformation, and in most cases is a part of any testing effort. One is going to be environmental data. The environmental data, when you look at all of the systems that support your business processes, whether you're a payer, whether you're a provider, there are multiple systems involved in that. And one of the things that you have to make sure we understand, or that you note, is what are those system configurations? How are those systems configured? Whether you're using Epic, WeatherTech, if you're a provider, and whether you're using whatever EHR system you happen to be using as your primary practice management system, you're going to need to know what those system configurations are. The other thing that's going to be important is user authorization and credentials. When you start talking about testing and you have to validate a claim and maybe the claim has been pended, you have to go to the website of the payer and actually look and see what the status code is. You're going to need to have all of that up front. So that's one of the things you want to make sure you think about in planning, because you don't want to be in a test cycle and now you don't have all the access and authorization that you need to conduct and run through the cycle. The other thing, configurations. Sometimes if the configurations can be from your desktop, your workstation that maybe you're working on, maybe it can be a network device, maybe there's a network device between you and your clearinghouse partner or from the clearinghouse. All of those things participate in the flow of data, and if it's not noted, it could skew the results potentially or delay some of the testing activities. The next category of data, which is really important, is your baseline data. As we think about ICD10 and what really is at stake here, obviously the goal of the industry is to remain financially neutral, that there not be any impact on whether it be provider, payer, clearinghouse, or anybody involved within the ecosystem. In order to do that, one of the things we have to understand is what are the expected results? What's the data that we're going to test? So we've got a specific set of ICD-10 codes. Maybe I am a cardiologist and I've got a certain set of codes that we bill primarily. And we want to make sure that we can send that data. Now today it's ICD-9. We need to convert that to ICD-10, and we need to send that data through the cycle and receive it back to make sure, one, that it paid, we received the acknowledgement, and then we got the amount that we expected. That's when we talk about baseline data. But that is a very critical point, because if you don't have baseline information, you don't have anything to reference to know where the variance and change happens. The last part, as far as the data classification goes, is going to be the input data. And this is data that you need to input into your system. So, for example, if you happen to be the HIM manager or one of the directors, you're going to have staff of people potentially coding ICD-9 and potentially coding ICD-10, potentially. And so that's going to be your input data. And all of that will flow through the cycle, again, making sure we understand what the baselines are to validate. And as Randy alluded to, while all of these activities are happening, it's very important to have control points in place to be able to manage all of these activities.
Yeah, thanks, Dexter. And, this reminds me of something that a conversation that I just had this morning with one of my clients, that, we're dealing with bringing on a new system, but there's going to be a large data conversion component to that. And so we're going to have to test newly input data, but we're also going to have to test data that's been converted, from the previous system. Do you have? I don't want to put you on the spot too much here, but do you have any thoughts on how people are going to be handling converted data?
I think that converted data is going to be, most people who will use converted data will probably be, they're leveraging someone's tool that they use gem files to actually convert the data. There are some challenges with using the gem files, and that when you do the ICD-9 to ICD-10 translations, in some cases it's a one-to-one direct map, and those are easy to do, so you can translate the data that way. If it is one-to-many, which some of them are, you need potentially either customized maps developed, or you need the human input of an experienced coder to actually look and make the determination based on all of the clinical documentation what the right code selection should be. So I think it's a hybrid approach. I think that is going to be an effective method, but it does need to be understood that it's kind of a hybrid approach. Would be my thoughts on that, Randy.
Okay. Thanks. So, and this does kind of lead us into kind of the major ways that people do actually build their test data. So, Dexter, if you want to speak to this one as well about the various ways, gets into engineering versus production data and so forth. If you want to talk to that for just a second.
Sure, I can do that. So one obviously way, the way everybody knows is direct data entry, and that's going to be as it relates to ICD10, where you have a coder actually go through. And when I say a code, I want to make sure that I'm talking about on the provider side. And even if you're a payer, even that you're doing your internal testing, you still have to have ICD10 test data to actually run through your adjudication process to validate the business rules that you guys have in place. So it's not. I'm referencing provider, but it applies universally across the space. The data entry piece is one way, depending on. You can get data into the system. The challenge with data entry, with direct data entry, is it doesn't typically scale when there's a large volumes of data needed. One thing that I don't know one thing that was noted in 5010, if organizations were submitting 25 claims, and that was like the max. And 25 claims wasn't enough variation to actually test adequately, and that's why part of some of the issues occurred. So whenever you have a large amount of data, and you're talking about, depending on, for example, you have a hospital who may have 500 different payers they work with, and from a payer perspective, you've got thousands of providers. You're going to need to, direct data entry now. The key is going to be, once you get the data, that you can reuse it, like Randy illustrated. That's going to be key to minimizing the cost and the amount of time that's going to be needed. The second approach that the industry has been talking about, and there are various different opinions, and I'll share my thoughts on this, is the idea of dual coding or in parallel testing, where you have a staff of people who now are in the provider space who are administering patient care and fully probably maxed out from a productivity standpoint already. But the idea that you're going to code ICD9 in your current production system, and that you're going to then, in a test environment, code ICD10. That's good in thought, but in practice, that's a very difficult task to accomplish, and it's difficult to manage because, again, going back to control and the management, all of that has to be managed in order to understand what all of the issues are associated with what you're doing, which could potentially impact your productivity, and that is the opposite of the outcomes that we desire. So dual coding will more than likely require additional staff for those of who may be considering that, because it's probably not likely that your existing staff is going to be able to take on the workload of dual coding and with the increased productivity that it already takes to code in ICD10. And maybe if you are a provider, you're thinking about you're going to use computer-assisted coding or some other solution to kind of augment that, but it's still going to be time that you need to account for. The third focus is kind of what we alluded to a little bit earlier, and that's engineering your test data. There are gem files out there. There are tools that that people have developed. We actually have a platform that we've developed that will allow you to actually convert and take your existing ICD9 data, obviously the one-to-one mapping, and convert that automatically, but then provide an interface for your coders to actually go and encode so you can get specific clinical encounters that are relevant to your specific organization. That data can then be converted to the standard 837 claim format and submitted either via batch or whatever method it is that you send to your external trading partners, all to be managed is the key, and with the expected results already defined because you've done that in your planning up front.
Okay, thanks, Dexter. And one thing, too, that I'd like to kind of comment on is this idea of the parallel test or the dual coding test. As Dexter says, it's pretty hard to pull that off. One thing that I would kind of put in is that, this used to be, back in the day, it used to be possible to do, when systems were not nearly as integrated as they are today. And so, there might be some folks up in management that they remember the last accounting system they put in or something, and they remembered how 2 or 3 people used the old system and 2 or 3 people used the new system, and they kind of looked at the results and they tried to kind of compare them together. And they, I'm not going to say it's never worked because it has worked in the past and things fairly simple. The problem with this is that you have to do everything twice and you have to do everything precisely, and then you have to have a way to compare it all. And not only is that very hard to do, but you might as well just test it. It was an early way back years ago to kind of cheat the idea of testing. It's kind of like a regression test in the live world, actually. So that would be my only thing, is just kind of be prepared if you hear that coming from some managers that have been around for a long, long time. Yeah, it used to work to some degree, but today it's just really, really hard to pull that off. And as Dexter said, one of the other things that makes it difficult are the resource levels that are typically lower. We don't have armies of people around to do this kind of thing anymore. So in managing the test data process, as we said, it's very important that we have a way to control the data, to know what you have, and you can actually kind of get used to it. But there's a lot about change management here that we need to understand. Configuration management, change management, know which version is in play. It becomes very important. One of the mantras that I say all the time is that your test is only as good as your environment. And what I mean by that is that your ability to know what's in your environment and to control that. It's also good to know who's going to do what when. That's where this plan for the trading partner coordination comes into play. It's almost like you have to be thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. It's a very big ship that we're trying to steer here, and you don't know what's on the agenda of your trading partners and what they're going to be working on or not working on, as the case may be. And then traceability is huge too, because you want to be able to trace this data to certain processes and to certain entities. And especially when you get into this idea of end-to-end testing, you need to know which test cases are doing what. And as I mentioned earlier, they do have a maintenance burden there with them. And so, you want to make sure you have the most efficient set of cases and data to support those, or that you can get, because you want to make sure that you're not over testing or you're under testing. You want to be in that place where you have just the right amount of coverage. Before I go on to this last slide, Dexter or Tauheed, do you have any other comments or thoughts about managing the process?
Yeah. The one thing I would like to add that I'd like for the audience to consider when you talk about your trader partner coordination, and as we define that, again, that's going to be provider, clearinghouse, anyone in between, medical billing company, and the payers. Obviously, in your planning, it's going to be key for you to understand when they're going to be available and ready for testing, so that you can bake that into your project schedules. The other part that I think needs to be thought about is there needs to probably be some kind of agreed upon governance. It's probably going to be a published schedule where certain things are being tested. That's the only way that you can organize a test of this magnitude in a collaborative, in a way that everybody's on the same page. So I think that's going to be really key. And then the other thing you need to think about is when there are issues, the prioritization of how issues will be resolved. Because we alluded to it earlier, what's important to me is important to my organization. It may not be as important to someone else, but it's all important, and we have to make sure that we figure that out in an organized fashion. And that needs to be thought through in the planning when you start talking about trader partner coordination. Normally, you when you set up your test strategy, your testing, you have agreed upon the prioritization of how issues are going to be rated from a risk perspective and the prioritization of how they will be resolved. That's still going to be applicable, just on a larger scale.
Okay, thanks. Tauheed, did you have anything on this one?
No, I don't. I think Dexter covers that for me, the organization part and the process part. Okay,
very good then. So the thing about strategies are that they give you this opportunity to do some investigation. One of the best values of a test strategy is that you find out what you need to know. You don't really have to know everything at the outset. They kind of give you some trails to follow. So here are 4 big questions we feel like any organization really needs to know, be able to answer about ICD10 testing, and especially around test data. One of the deals we've mentioned control. How are you going to monitor and track activities? So there's two angles on this, two levels: the internal testing, which are your own systems, but then the end-to-end testing, which gets into external integration. That's where the plan that Dexter just mentioned really comes into play. Whether that be a test management tool, whether that be a series of daily interactions with folks, how are you going to know what's going on is a really key thing. And I would also suggest to you that the answer is not just a tool, because just because you have the tool doesn't mean that you're going to be monitoring effectively. So that depends on the quality of things. But then a really important thing is, what do we know about our ICD10 impact? Have we done an assessment around that? Do we know where the highest risk is, especially financially? But it could be into patient data, patient safety. One of the ways people also look at test data is through an analytical method. We don't have time to get into it here, but there used to be this whole thing about population analysis where you would do an analysis of your production data. In this case, let's say diagnostic codes. Okay, so you have the ICD-10 codes here. We'd be looking at, well, what are the most critical ICD-9 codes that we work with? And so you find out where the biggest population of those would be, and then you model your data around that. You can include the other, you can include other codes, but you want to especially include the ones that are the 80% of what you do. And then there's this big thing about, well, what approach are we going to use for test data? Are we going to use a tool? Are we going to try to create it by hand? Are we going to try to copy from production and convert it? All of these methods, that they have their pros and cons, okay? And the important thing is that you know where you're going to get your data from. And then the fourth question is another one that Dexter mentioned. How are we going to deal with the issues that we identify in testing? Consider this: you find something, you report it to the vendor, and the vendor comes back to you. Well, that must be a data problem. Okay, how are you going to deal with that? Okay, are you going to be able to isolate it to say yes, it is, or no, it's not actually a data problem? Can you show where your data came from and those kinds of things? And also, we know that there are going to be a lot of people with homegrown systems that have evolved over the years that are fairly not very well documented. And so there's going to be some issues there about even how do we know what to fix in our own systems. Now, that's my perspective on some of these questions. I'm going to throw it back to my co-presenters here to see if they have any input that they would like to go back and add to any of these.
Randy, this is Dexter. Only other thing, again, around the financial reimbursement, I think if you understand what those potential financial impacts are going to be, that can help an organization prioritize where you spend your time to minimize any potential impacts that might happen as a result of the ICD-10 transformation. That would be the one thing that I would add. Obviously, if you haven't done your assessments, that's an important piece of work that needs to be done to help understand where the focus should be, because, again, ICD-10 spans across a lot of different areas within the industry, and because it touches so many different things, it's important to make sure we focus on the right areas.
Okay, very good. And these are the things that gets management's attention, I believe. Where's the risk to the organization, whether you're a payer or a provider or a clearinghouse? These are, the big, one of the biggest things is financial reimbursement, but it's the numbers that management is going to want to look at. And so as testers, I think it's really important to support your own efforts, that you're able to know what some of these numbers are. It translates down into resources. It translates into your overall test approach, into your budgeting of testing, your timelines. It's going to drive probably most of what you do in testing. Okay. So now I'm going to, I was going to open up for questions and answers. Before we do that real quickly, just a few next steps here for you. We have our white paper on ICD-10 testing. at integritussolutions.net, Dexter's company's website. We say, hey, if this should be on your management's radar, and if it's not, yesterday was the day to get it there. So you need to get their attention, their support about all this, and don't just assume that that everyone has the answers yet, because you may be surprised at what hasn't been done. We welcome you if you want more information and you'd like to schedule a conversation with either Dexter or myself. Here's our email addresses. And then, of course, CMS has a ton of stuff out there about this. Now, we're going to post the slides, as I said. We'll have those at several locations, but the one that I can point you to immediately here after the session will be at my blog, randallrice.blogspot.com. Also, Dexter will have them on his website too, at integritussolutions.net. And we're recording this session, so we will have it in a video format that you can view if someone in your organization, if you'd like to share this with someone, they can go through and hear what we've said as well. So at this point, if anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to try to field those right now. Now you can also type them into the chat window if you like. You can do that as well. Well, it appears as if everyone is good. But before we close out, then I'll once again ask my co-presenters if they have any closing remarks that they would like to make.
No, I just want to thank the audience for listening in to us today. Hopefully they have found what we've shared. This is a journey that we're all in together, and hopefully as we go down this path, we will continue to learn from one another, and we'll achieve the outcomes that everybody is working so hard to accomplish.
Okay, thanks, Dexter. Tauheed, you have anything? I just want to thank everyone for listening to us, and hope that we can get through ICD10 altogether.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you both for being part of this as well, and I would like to thank all of our audience for being here today. Stay tuned for the next one. We'll figure out exactly what that topic is. By the way, if you do have a suggestion for a topic you'd like for us to address, once again, send Dexter or I an email. I'll put those email addresses back up here real quickly. Mine is rrice@riceconsulting.com. Dexter's is dexter.oliver@integritussolutions.net. So if you have something that you think that you'd like to hear us do a webinar on, just give us a shout, and we will sure take that into consideration on our next one. So being on this one, you'll get an automatic invite to the next one. How's that? So thanks, everyone, for your participation today. We appreciate it, and best of luck to you, and we'll see you a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you.